And what will the government do now to try and get Labor to come to agree to the repeal of the Qantas Sale Act? I'm joined now from our Canberra studio by Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasurer, Steve Ciobo, and Labor's Stephen Jones is joining me. Gentlemen, what did you make of the press conference that we just heard? Steve Ciobo, to you first. Are you very happy that the debt guarantee was sort of suddenly off the table and that you're just sticking with the repeal of the Qantas Sale Act?
Well, Helen, look, I mean, what I'm pleased about is that we've actually got a solution on the table. We are saying to Qantas and to Qantas shareholders that we believe in a strong Qantas. We want the airline to be successful long term. And from my perspective, the government's announcement has really made it clear that we've got a plan of action to help to facilitate that. And fundamentally now, what needs to happen is for the Labor Party to recognise that what's at stake are Australian jobs, for the Labor Party to recognise that what is at stake is an iconic Australian airline, and for the Labor Party to stop playing silly games and to actually help the government repeal Section 3 of the Qantas Sale Act to make sure that Qantas has a strong, viable future that helps to ensure that jobs are there long term, stop the political posturing and actually step up to the plate.
Stephen Jones, what's your view? Because you're now in the box seat. Your side has to agree to this or not.
Labor will not support this plan. It's a disaster for jobs.
Why?
They've had 6 months. They have had 6 months to come up with an idea, and they've come up with a dud idea. I just don't see how.
Sorry, Stephen. Why is it a huge problem for jobs?
Well, one of the things that having Australia, the Qantas Airlines majority owned, is that they headquarter here in Australia. There are provisions in the Act which go to all sorts of the service provisions that Qantas must provide, which must be done here in Australia. Tony Abbott's big idea is to remove all of those protections for Australian jobs and to ensure what effectively will be the takeover of another government of the Australian Airlines. I don't see how it is in the interests of Australian workers or Australian passengers to have another government come in and buy our national airline. I don't see how it makes sense.
Stephen Ciobo, do you reckon that it will lead to, firstly, jobs going offshore, and secondly, that a foreigner will come in and control Qantas?
Helen, let's cut through the garbage on this, okay? Let's be clear about what's going on. I mean, it is an incredible statement from the Labor Party to reject already this statement that's been put forward, this plan of action by the government about what we're going to do. What Stephen Jones is saying, what Bill Shorten is saying, what the Labor Party is saying is they don't care how many Australians' jobs are at risk. They don't care what the long-term future is for Qantas, because they are going to pay homage to their union masters and make sure that they stand in the way of Qantas actually getting access to capital. The exact same kind of capital that Virgin Airlines is using to make sure that they are a vibrant competitor, a vibrant airline employing Australians, a vibrant airline that's actually carrying Aussie passengers. And Labor says, no, we don't care. Virgin's using that formula effectively, but we in the Labor Party are going to bow down before the altar of the union movement, and we're not going to allow any changes to the Qantas Sale Act because it doesn't suit the unions, and they don't, unfortunately, seem to care how many Australians lose their jobs in the process.
Oh, Steve
Frankly,
Ciobo,
this is trash on stilts. This is absolute trash on stilts. What Steve hasn't been able to explain is why they didn't pull the other lever, the debt guarantee, which was the lever that Qantas actually asked for.
Happy to explain.
Now, what Steve is proposing is remove all of the protections for Australian jobs that exist in the Qantas Sale Act now, remove all of those protections, and I'll tell you what will happen. Those jobs will go offshore.
All
That's
right,
what will
well,
happen.
you have said that. I just wonder, Steve Ciobo, if you can just explain, you said you would explain,
sure,
why you didn't back the debt guarantee, which is what Qantas was asking for.
Well, what Qantas is asking for absolutely is what's in Qantas's best interest as an airline in isolation and not looking at the market. And surprise, surprise, Helen, surprise, surprise, the Labor Party said, well, you should get out the chequebook again. That's what we would have done. They said it about Qantas. They're saying it about SPC. They said it about Holden. They said it about Ford.
Qantas did not ask for a cash injection. They asked for the taxpayer or the government to underwrite their debt or to guarantee their debt. Why did you decide not to do that? Tony Abbott said it was on the table, but it was dismissed, not supported.
Because we are applying the same set of rules to every single business in the industry. That's why. We are creating a level playing field here. At the moment, Qantas fights with one arm tied behind its back because it's got to serve the restrictions in the Qantas Sale Act. The Labor Party put those restrictions in place. The Labor Party is refusing to remove the restrictions because for Labor, what this is all about, and as I said, when you cut through the garbage, for Bill Shorten and the Labor Party, this is about protecting their union mates before it's about protecting Australian jobs. They don't care how many Aussie jobs go if it means that union leaders in the Labor Party and in the unions that work at Qantas keep their jobs. That's all they care about.
All right, Steve, sorry,
Here's
Stephen
the question,
Jones,
Helen. There's a really important question, important question here. Why was it not in the national interest to allow GrainCorp to be sold not 6 months ago, and yet it is in the national interest. It is in the national interest to open up the protections in the Qantas Sale Act, which say Australia must be retained in majority ownership. Two different set of rules applied. Two different set of rules applied. Steve says they've applied a consistent set of rules. It's simply not true.
Steve Ciobo?
I'm sorry, Alan, I'm laughing. I mean, this is coming from the Labor Party, who have been criticising the GrainCorp decision uphill and down Dale, and now all of a sudden they're pointing a finger back at it saying, well, hang on, we can't make sense of this.
Why is there two different sets of rules?
What we made it very clear is that we will always make decisions in Australia's national interest.
But in this case, you are allowing a foreigner in, and in the GrainCorp you said no way.
Oh, Helen, I mean, for goodness sake, seriously. I mean, there are foreign ownership issues that come up on a daily basis. I sign off 20 or 30 a week that deal with foreign investment. I mean, to point at one example. Well,
that was a major one that the Treasurer had to... But look, Steve Ciobo, if I could just ask you, can you just clear up about this repeal of Part 3 of the Sale Act? What will happen to that 49% total foreign ownership benchmark, where the restriction is now?
Sure, well, that's in Part 3 and that will go. But importantly, Helen, under the Air Navigation Act, there'll still be a requirement for it to be an Australian airline.
And what does that actually mean? Because it was hard to decipher what the Prime Minister, how he answered that. He wasn't very specific about what that means, being Australian-owned.
Sure, look, I mean, I only saw the press conference the same as you did a short while ago, and I'm not in Cabinet, so I wasn't part of the deliberations. But my understanding at this very preliminary stage of the evening is that the consequence of the decision is that we will see the Part 3 49% cap go, but the requirements under the Air Navigation Act for an airline to be majority Australian with respect to international operations will stay. So in effect, that will still require 51% ownership for international operations.
All right, that's if it stays as the domestic and international together.
Correct.
Because obviously Virgin split theirs. All right.
And what they do is ultimately up to Qantas, of course.
Yes, which is what the Prime Minister actually said. Steve Ciobo, what is your evidence that the jobs will automatically go offshore?
Well, I think you actually mean that to Steve.
Oh, sorry, Stephen Jones.
What we know is that Qantas, but for the provisions within the Qantas Sale Act, has attempted to move significant numbers of jobs offshore. We know that it is the Qantas Sale Act that has put a brake, if you like, some protection for Australian workers in ensuring that those jobs stay here in Australia. The fact that it requires the headquarters, because we think it's in the national interest.
Why is it that they want to ship
We think
jobs
it's in the
offshore?
national interest,
Is it a feel-good exercise?
No, we think it's in the national interest that those jobs remain here. I mean, unlike your Prime Minister, we think the government should be out there fighting for Australian jobs.
All right, Stephen Jones, can I just ask...
seems to have a different view.
Again, we've only just heard the press conference before we came on air, so you may not have had a chance, but what will Bill Shorten's response to this be?
Now, Bill Shorten will say quite clearly, Labor will not support this change.
All right, I do want to move on. We've only got a few minutes left, and I just want to ask about the other issues that are going on at the moment, really, is the lead up to the May budget. The government is preparing to at least easing the way to make some cuts, either a co-payment for the Medicare payment or cuts to the disability support pension. Now, Steve Ciobo, these sorts of cuts, are they definitely on the table?
Absolutely not, Helen. I want to pull you up right now. because in your preface and your question, you made reference to two things: disability support pension. That's a Labor scare campaign. We haven't announced anything in that sense. In fact, on March
Kevin
the 20th,
Andrews
the
did make it fairly clear yesterday that he wanted to bring it back, bring it down in line with the dole. So that sounds like a cut.
No. On March the 20th, the disability support pension is actually going to increase. I mean, we're getting an increase in disability support pension. I think.
Yeah, but that's the normal annual one. That's the normal annual one. What about the
separate?
Okay, the flagged cuts that, or at least streamlining that Kevin Andrews talked about yesterday?
Well, we spend over $100 billion a year in the federal budget on welfare payments, and I think what you're talking about there, Helen, is our planned review of welfare, and that is obviously to look at making sure that it's sustainable. I mean, make no mistake, Helen, we have a very difficult task ahead of us.
Sure.
We've been left, after 6 years of Labor, $123 billion of deficit, $667 billion of a peak debt that Labor's left to us. That was Labor's gift. Generations of Australians will take decades to pay this debt off. So we unfortunately have to make some hard decisions. So we are looking at all avenues to look at what we can do to make sure that the federal budget is sustainable.
Labor's gift to the coalition was a AAA credit rating and the lowest unemployment rate in the OECD. But can I take you up on the point that you've made, Steve, about the scare campaign? Because you're right. There is a scare campaign that's being run, and it's by the Minister himself, Kevin Andrews, because this is the guy that's been coming out almost on a daily basis. Well, if they're not thought bubbles, they're policy proposals about changing the disability support pension, changing the rules around New Start, changing this, changing that. We could be forgiven for thinking that he's got some pretty scary ideas in mind, because he's the bloke that's been there almost on a daily basis with a new idea.
All right, Stephen Jones, just briefly on a co-payment for Medicare, if that flies?
No, we think that this is the thin edge of the wedge. Medicare is celebrating its 30th year this year, 30th birthday. We hope it has its 35th birthday, but we're very concerned that what the coalition is trying to do is a backdoor way of basically diluting and doing away with Medicare, because we see the co-payment as just the thin edge of the wedge. That's what they have in mind.
Steve Ciobo, is it? Because, I mean, in a sense, it's not going to greatly add to the growing costs of Medicare, but you would argue, obviously, that it's, you know, why shouldn't people who can afford to pay a bit contribute something like $6 every GP visit?
Well, I'd make 2 points, Helen. The first is that we're talking about speculation that's in the media. The government's made absolutely no announcement in this respect. This is all coming off the back of speculation about what the Commission of Audit might do. That's the first and most important point. The second point is to just touch upon your issue, which is that, yes, if you ask me personally what my view is that if someone's earning $500,000, I don't think it's unacceptable to say to that person, you know what, maybe you should make a contribution towards the cost of visiting a doctor, and maybe that shouldn't be borne completely by taxpayers. So,
but Steve Ciobo, can you just clear up something for me? If someone is earning $500,000, they're probably not going to go to a bulk billing doctor.
Oh, no, that's absolutely not the case, Helen. I mean, there are a lot of people who go to doctors who bulk bill. There's a lot of people who go to doctors where they make a small payment already, but you've still got the bulk of the visit that's actually charged back to taxpayers. So the reality is there are lots of examples. And, you know, Helen, as I said, let's not lose sight of the fact that this is media speculation. I know it's in the Labor's interest to be out there whipping it up into a frenzy, and it's the death of Medicare, and Steve's hyperventilating as he says, well, you know, we hope Medicare makes it to age 35. They've made it to 30, but they mightn't make it to 35. I mean, you know, look, I'll worry about all of this when we actually announce plans, and at this point in time, I'm not going to buy into silliness from the Labor Party as they run around the country telling everyone the sky's falling in, when in reality what we're trying to do is deal with the whopping mess that Labor left behind, where once again, true to form, Labor just keeps saying spend more money, spend more money, spend more money.
All right, gentlemen.
Reply, Helen. If it is speculation, it's speculation led by Steve here, who just said he thinks it's a good idea. He's a front bencher, and Peter Dutton, the Health Minister, who also said he thinks it's a good idea. Speculation, smoke, fire.
Gentlemen, we do have to call it quits there. Steve Ciobo and Stephen Jones, thank you so much for joining me.